Welcome to the regular meeting of the Homelessness and Poverty Committee of the Los Angeles City Council. My name is Marquise Harris Dawson, chairperson of the committee and council member representing District 8, joined by our vice chair, Monica Rodriguez, representing Council District 7, and Jose Huizar, the founding board chair of this committee, only standing committee in the country on homeless and poverty, Mr. Jose Huizar of District 14. We will begin our meeting with the multiple comment cards. If you filled out cards on items exceeding 3, you'll be given 2 minutes to speak, and those folks will be asked to speak now. So if you'll join us at the table, and the clerk will give you 2 minutes to speak. Pepita Pig.
Fair. Yes. So we have Measure H. I'm here to bitch about H, and H, the wasted sales tax money that's being stolen and not given to anyone on Skid Row. All you have to do is drive down Skid Row. You know, after the meeting we had down in South Central, which you failed to attend. You don't give a shit about anybody south of the 10 freeway, or you've been there last night to talk to the police chief and say, fuck the police, to quote NWA. So, number 2, State Bills 235, 166, 540, statewide affordable housing crisis. You'd be able to afford a fucking house if we had jobs. But you don't create jobs. You put businesses out of business, and then they move on to other cities, like the mayor of Pomona and the mayor of Claremont that my friend here talked to yesterday with Catherine Barger. They're going to create jobs while you lose jobs, and that's why you proudly say that this city is the only city with a homeless and poverty. No, that's a shame. You fucked the city up so bad, you have to have a standing homelessness and poverty. No, any city that has that is fucked up. Number 3, funding needed to the winter shelter. You have the money. You know you have the money. You give it to the police. 51% of the budget goes to the fucking cops. Give it to the homeless scumbags. Yes.
Thank you so much. That concludes our multiple item speakers.
Yay.
We will excuse you, Mr. Spindler, and ask you to not disrupt the meeting.
What about general?
That's your first warning.
General public comment?
Your second warning.
What about the general?
Could you read item number 4 into the record, Mr. Clerk?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Item number 4 is a motion by Council Members Blumenfield, Harris Dawson, Englander, relative to providing recreational vehicle, waste pumping, and dump stations for RVs on the wait list for towing and individuals living in RVs who are enrolled in services for housing placement.
Excellent. So we have a report from sanitation on this matter.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Steve Pedersen. I'm Chief Environmental Compliance Inspector, LA Sanitation. And to my right is Senior Environmental Compliance Inspector Gonzalo Borrega. We've reviewed the motion, and we have come up with 3 different options for different scenarios. The first, if an RV is inoperable and leaking, we will go out there and pump out the black water tanks and the brown water tanks and dispose of the water, and we'll clean up any mess. Second, if the vehicle is inoperable but not leaking, then we have an agreement with LAPD that their tow truck companies can go to one of our dump sites and dump the waste there. It's their option. If the vehicle is operable, then we have waste sites at Hyperion and Gaffey that persons can go dump, and we are looking into additional availability of waste sites in the valley.
So Hyperion, Gaffey, and that's it?
That's it, what we have right now.
Okay. Does that conclude your comments?
That's
Anything else?
it. I'm open to questions.
Anything from you, sir? No? All right. Questions, members?
Yes.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Has there been any potential private partnerships that would, particularly in the San Fernando Valley, given that Hyperion and Gaffey really service the southernmost portion of the city of Los Angeles, and given the spike of these vehicles in the North San Fernando Valley, throughout the San Fernando Valley, have you identified any potential partners that could be recipients of this or to be supportive in some way on an interim basis until the city can accommodate?
No, we have not. If we enter into a private, there may be some financial considerations, and we would have to find funding for that.
But this contributes, I mean, it creates a problem, obviously, given some of the waste leakages that are happening in the valley. So, I mean, does it pose a public health risk if we don't start identifying some of those partnerships?
Well, currently, if there is a leakage, we will respond to it, and we'll clean up the spillage and then address what's in the tanks.
So you have a mobile capacity to address this at this time? And so on an interim basis, can you increase the mobile capacity to accommodate the needs in the San Fernando Valley, given that you don't have a facility that can be receiving this?
If there is spillage or leakage, we can deal with it. We have responders that go out 24/7.
But even on the dumping part, that's the part, is that we have a huge gap in servicing the needs in the valley, right?
We are working on that. We have not come to any conclusions on that.
I would really appreciate seeing some type of, increased capacity on the mobile side to accommodate the needs in the valley, given that you don't have a physical location at this time that can accommodate that disposal. That poses a serious risk in the San Fernando Valley.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I think the question the Councilwoman raises is fairly apparent, and I imagine that's a question that you all have grappled with as well. What is your plan to deal with? It's really not just the north. It's not even right. It's San Fernando Valley is the extreme of it, but still, the east side, even the northern part of South LA is really far from Hyperion or Gaffey. Right. And so I'm just wondering what you all's thinking is about that, because what it sounds like you're laying out is a scenario where a tow truck goes to pick up a RV that's not leaking, can say, I can't drive all the way to Hyperion, so I'm going to just leave the truck here, the RV here.
Mm-hmm. And we are working to find additional sites. Would you like to answer?
So if an RV is not leaking, that tank is intact, and that there's no reason or need by the tow company to empty the tank out. So at that point, the RV should be taken back to the official police garage and impounded through normal LAPD process. So the only time this becomes an issue is when it's leaking or they illegally dump the materials onto the street.
That's the fear.
And which is a crime, and we will respond to all of these leaking or dumpings on a daily basis, citywide.
If I may, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Because isn't the illegal dumping, it's what's contributing to the public health hazards in some of our sewage systems, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So, which is why I think this is obviously a very sensitive need to address on a citywide basis very quickly.
We work with LAPD and the HOPE teams and 311 and all that to address all the complaints for illicit discharge or leaking RVs. And they'll either be cited, it'll be mitigated, or they'll be towed away based on the circumstances of the incident.
Thank you, Mr. Rizar. Excellent. So we appreciate that. Just one thing I would say to you all is on the consumer side, on the resident side, and council office side, it always seems like there's a reason why an RV can't be removed. And this sounds like a legitimate one if it's got a full tank that there's nowhere to dump. So, I think we'd appreciate some urgency on figuring that out.
If I could clarify, there
Yeah.
are private dump sites that charge anywhere from $10 to $25 to dump in the
Okay.
valley. And we can provide that list also.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Appreciate your report. We have a public comment from Council District 3. Ms. Castillo.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Cecilia Castillo. I'm a legislative deputy for Councilmember Blumenfield, monitoring this issue. On behalf of Councilmember Blumenfield, I'd like to thank you for opening up this discussion on this motion. The goal is to be proactive and deal with the issue before it's a hazard on the street.
Right.
It's cheaper to deal with it before it becomes a hazard on the street. So homelessness has increased in the entire city, and as a result, we need to come up with solutions that address the issue taking place in all corners of the city. The West San Fernando Valley has experienced an increase in individuals living in RVs. There has been an increase for calls for service involving illicit discharge of hazardous substances from RVs onto city streets. We need a more proactive approach to prevent these hazardous situations by increasing RV waste pumping options in the San Fernando Valley and other parts of the city. This tool should make it easier to tow illegally parked RVs and to also allow those enrolled in services to have an option to properly dispose of their RV waste. I would like to commend Bureau of Sanitation for all their efforts and flexibility in dealing with sanitary issues related to homelessness. These efforts improve the quality of life for residents, both housed and homeless. Councilmember Blumenfield looks forward to seeing the Bureau of Sanitation's recommendations on this item. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So if there's nothing further on this matter, we'll continue it, and I'd like to continue it with an instruction that we get a report back on both on the private dump sites and the progress towards finding additional dump sites, as the sanitation indicated in their report. Thank you. Can you read item number 3?
Yes, sir. Item number 3 is a motion from Council Members Cedillo and Martinez relative to identifying the funding needed and effectuating the winter shelter program for fiscal year 2017-18 in Council District 1.
Excellent. Thank you. So I believe we have a report from HCID and LASA on the winter shelter program.
Good morning, council members. I'm Chris Calandrillo, Director of Programs at LASA. 2 years ago, El Nino increased the number of winter shelters that were funded through the city of Los Angeles. El Nino didn't hit in the way that we expected. So last year we had additional money in our budget to be able to allow for an augmentation of our normal winter shelter. So this year that money is gone. One of the ways that augmentation was used was to create a winter shelter in CD1 2 years ago and last year. But without the additional funding, we won't be able to continue that winter shelter. And that's the intent of this item, I believe, is to speak to the need for the winter shelter in Northeast LA. The winter shelter for the last 2 years has been held at the All Saints Church in Highland Park. The All Saints Church has chosen not to continue if we're able to this year. We've worked with CD1 to identify an Episcopal church in Lincoln Heights, which would also serve this population. Last year, the need was great enough that we had to create a transportation for the overflow. So almost every night there was an overflow at this site that we had to transport to other shelters. So where the need exists, the money doesn't exist this year. The base cost is roughly $83,000 for the winter shelter season, which is December 1st to the end of February. Typically, we also fund winter shelters to operate 24 hours when the weather is severe, and we try to fund 21 days of severe weather. So when it's raining, we ask sites to stay open, essentially, or excessively cold. To add the 21 days brings us up to about $97,000 for this site for the winter shelter season. I believe this motion directs the city offices to find that funding. And I'm going to defer to our friends at CAO and HCID
Mr. Chair.
in that, or I can answer questions on the topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have this Northeast shelter at All Saints Church in Highland Park that has been doing a wonderful job in providing shelter in an area that needs it. As you know, we are attempting as a city to decentralize services away from historic areas such as Skid Row, Venice, Hollywood. And the reality is that, as many of us know, homelessness is everywhere now. And this is the only shelter that has served the Northeast area, and they've done a very good job. And I need to correct something what was your name again?
Chris.
From
LASA.
From LASA, yeah. I need to correct something that was made in a statement, and there was a statement made that Recycled Resources that has been operating the shelter is no longer interested if they can't. We were told that they are very interested in continuing to provide the service. So I need to correct that.
Yeah, if I can provide some clarity,
Sure.
what I intended to say was that All Saints is not interested in continuing. You are correct. Recycle Resources is interested in continuing.
Okay, which is different from what I've heard, that we are able to continue moving forward and providing the service, and that all we need is additional funding to make it possible. What I'm concerned about is that we're going to remove a much-needed resource in that community, which is serve Northeast, both CD1, CD14, and CD13, and not have this service at all. And it's great everywhere. I mean, we need it throughout the city, but when something's working and it's working well, I just don't understand why we would be removing it from there and putting it somewhere else. And even if you think about Lincoln Heights, there's other shelters closer to Lincoln Heights, but out there northeast, there's nothing. So I'm quite concerned about what I'm hearing here today, and I'm just thinking about, I would like to amend this motion that we look to continue providing services at All Saints and Recycled Resources without precluding Lincoln Heights, but my preference would be is why not continue something that's working? And it just boggles my mind, why would we start going in this direction? Anything that anyone who could shed light on that? This is a CD1 motion. Mm-hmm. Anyone here from CD1? No? Okay. So,
Meg Barclay, City Homeless Coordinator.
Yeah.
We've been working with LASA on this to make sure that the funding, there may be some funding in the emergency shelter grant that could cover the costs of this shelter, and we can continue to work with them on making sure that there is a site and the operator.
Okay.
Right? And
Look, I have nothing wrong with trying to find other sites and creating new sites. Excellent. But why shut this one down when it's working? I think there's willing participants. So if I could amend the motion to also include Recycled Resources that is operating out of All Saints Church, and see if that could be a priority in making sure that we have a service in Northeast LA before we take away the only shelter that exists up there.
I believe the intention is to make sure that there is a shelter in the Northeast by the time the winter shelter program.
Which is the Lincoln Heights site. Our understanding is that All Saints is the folks that are choosing not to move forward. But with your comments and with your motion, we will go back to them and
if you could, please.
and make sure that
I'd like, if we could amend my motion to say, if All Saints is willing to continue, that should be a priority in seeking to continue to provide a winter shelter program in Northeast LA. Lincoln Heights, you could argue it's Northeast LA. It's more Central LA than Northeast LA. There are some real both geographical and just historical descriptions of where is Lincoln Heights. Is it Central or Northeast? I mean, it's more Central to me, but that's my perspective. Almost like, where does the East Side begin, right? Is it Echo Park and Silver Lake, or is it Boyle Heights and the rest of unincorporated East LA? But I got my own views on that. But to me, Lincoln Heights is more Central. Northeast it needs its own, shelter program. And if you think about our homeless individuals who are looking to get assistance, they are really blocked in either perceived or real obstacles from coming to Lincoln Heights from Northeast LA for service. So we really need a site up there, and if something's working, why tear it up? So.
Been joined by Councilmember Curran Price of the 9th District. Questions or comments? Thank you. So we have two amendments. I'd like to put forward an amendment that we actually look at all our winter shelter program to make sure that they have the resources to go forward and identify possibilities for those, in addition to the amendment that Councilmember Huizar put forward. Do we need individual votes on those amendments, or can we look at the whole thing? And Mr. Rodriguez has a question.
I'm sorry. I apologize. We do have a comprehensive list of all the winter shelters throughout the city, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I do know that there's one, again, kind of similar situation in the Northeast Valley, which is well-defined, Mr. Huizar. We knew. But, where there may or may not be a shelter, which there's question as to the success of that particular shelter. And so really would appreciate getting a list as well.
Sure. We can give you the list.
One.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Excellent. No worries. So we have one comment card, and then we will take this matter up. Suzanne Smith.
Good afternoon. My name is Suzanne Smith. I am a resident of Eagle Rock. I am also a member of the Eagle Rock Neighborhood Council, but I'm here in my individual capacity. I have worked with Recycle Resources for 3 years, volunteered with them, and I can assure you that they have done an incredible job, and that they are currently preparing for the winter season. The church is on board. I don't believe that anyone from Recycle Resources or the church has been contacted by LASA or Council District 1. And I want to encourage you, I very much appreciate Councilman Huizar's amendment, because they currently operate a Saturday drop-in center with showers. They do laundry during the week to maintain connection with their folks who were in the shelter during the winter, so that they have some basis for going forward in the winter season. It's a terrific program, and I'd hate to see it lose. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk?
Yes, sir. So just for the record, the committee is approving the motion with a couple of amendments made by the chair and Councilmember Huizar.
Excellent. Hearing no objections, that'll be the order.
Yes, sir.
Can you read item number 1?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Item number 1 is a CAO report relative to the results of LA County Measure H planning process.
You're on Measure H.
Good afternoon, Meg Barclay, City Homeless Coordinator in the CAO's office. As we reported back in June, Measure H is expected to raise $355 million annually for over 10 years. The Board of Supervisors approved funding recommendations, and I handed out the summary of the recommendations by strategy here. Those were approved in mid-June of this year. 21 county homeless initiative strategies are eligible for Measure H funding. 4 of them were added when Measure H passed. Of the roughly $59 million that was funded in year 1, $201 million of that are allocated to 7 core strategies that are co-led by LASA. A number of these received one-time funding from the city's fiscal year 16-17 budget. About $71 million of that $201 million is to continue or expand services that received one-time funding in the city's 16-17 budget. The strategy funding for E8 will largely support existing shelter capacity, although there was an RFP that went out. It closed on Friday to expand or look for new beds to fund with Measure H this year, and there will be a couple of other RFPs to identify specific new shelter beds for specific populations as well going forward. Funding recommendations also allocated significant funding for programs at the city. The 2 notable ones are Strategy B4. Now the Measure H will be funding up to $3,500 for landlord incentives for up to 1,200 City Section 8 vouchers to encourage landlords to take homeless clients with City Section 8 vouchers. And $3 million under strategies C2 and C7, the employment strategies, will actually go to expand the city's LA Rise program administered by the Economic and Workforce Development Department. The one glitch was that funding recommendations for emergency response teams at LASA that have been working with the LAPD HOPE teams were sort of switched around and were designated to support law enforcement county-wide, although we've been working since the last time we talked about ERTs for HOPE teams in the last Homelessness and Poverty Committee. We've been talking to the county. They're willing to continue Measure H funding for 5 of those teams for the balance of this year, and so we'll be identifying 9 months funding for the other 4. Which is a lot less than.
Yes. Sort of move things around. Can you expound on that?
So, well, we had originally, and at LASA, at our request, LASA had requested funding for, full year funding for those 9 teams in the Measure H, in their Measure H funding request, and they were originally in there, and then when the recommendations went to the Board of Supervisors, those teams were expanded to be to work with law enforcement countywide as opposed to being dedicated to work with LAPD HOPE teams. So we made the argument that the city is 60% of the homeless population. Could we get 60% of those teams for at least the first year? ERT funding for those emergency response teams in E6 is going down. I think the E6 funding, actually the allocations for ERTs actually gets a little bit reduced over time, and so that's a lot of the funding in E6 is going towards those multidisciplinary teams that include nurse practitioners and other very specialized team members as opposed to the more general team members for ERTs. And so it's not going to be a really stable funding source for the types of teams that are working with the HOPE teams right now. But at least for this year, we're going to be getting at least a portion of that money for our teams.
So on the countywide services, I mean, at one level that makes sense, but I guess I would have a specific question and have curiosity as to whether or not you all have engaged the county around border areas, so both county unincorporated, so my district both borders Inglewood, county unincorporated, District 7 borders City of San Fernando and some unincorporated area. CD 14 has unincorporated, CD 9 has unincorporated on the east, so how are they thinking about it in that way, or is it just spread it evenly throughout Los Angeles County, which is huge?
Are you talking about those teams in particular?
I'm talking about the other percentage that we didn't get.
I can't speak to what I think LASA is still, and there's someone from the outreach teams here who could probably speak to this better from LASA than I can, but my understanding is that the protocol for how they're going to be coordinating with the other law enforcement agencies countywide is also still being worked out, and so that's part of why there's sort of space in that effort for these teams to remain dedicated to HOPE this year, because I think they're looking for, as I understand it, they're also looking for those law enforcement agencies to make a commitment on their side, as well as we have with HOPE teams, that they would be making a commitment to dedicate staff or staff time to addressing homelessness specifically, as opposed to more general support for more general law enforcement.
Mr. Price.
Thank you. Thanks for your report and for your efforts. You mentioned there were 4 categories added after HHH passed. Which were they?
Yes. The county added 4 strategies that when they put Measure H on the ballot, that if that they didn't have funding for in the budget when the County Homeless Initiative was passed. And so one of those, okay, let me see if you're testing my memory here. Yeah. So one of them was Strategy D7 to provide services for permanent supportive housing. So since Measure H has passed, now the county can commit to providing the service component of permanent supportive housing for any new units that come online. Another one was F7, Housing Innovation Fund. Oh, F7, those 2 F7s, the Preserve and Promote Development of Affordable Housing for Homeless Families and Individuals, and the Housing Innovation Fund. So that's capital money that they didn't have. They didn't have the money to put into a strategy like that when the Homeless Initiative was passed, but with the passage of Measure H, they're able to do that. And the other ones are escaping me right now. I can't remember what the other 2 are off the top of my head.
Well, at least the funding is
Yeah, I
flowing
used to
now.
know what they were, but I've lost my. But
All right.
I can get back to you with the other two
Just
strategies
curious.
that were added.
Just
Yeah.
curious. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Marks? That's it? Mr. Rodriguez? Mr. Huizar? Excellent. Thank you so much for your report. There are no public comments items on this matter, so we can move to the next item.
Yes, sir. Item number 2 is a verbal status update from the CLA concerning State Bills 2, 3, 35, 166, 167, and 540 that addresses the statewide affordable housing crisis.
Excellent. So our representatives in Sacramento and our governor have taken some bold moves to help us deal with the housing crisis in the state and here in the city. We're eager to hear your initial analysis of said proposals.
Good afternoon. John Wickham with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst. And yes, the legislature just concluded the first part of their biannual session. They passed a number of bills related to housing. And there are kind of three groups of bills. The first group relates to new funding, which is great. SB 2 creates a new $75 fee imposed on different types of real estate instruments. So it's not on the sale of a residential or commercial property. The fee is charged to things like deeds or grant deeds, deeds of trust, conveyances, quitclaim deeds, notices of default, easements, those kinds of things. So $75 per filing. It's estimated to generate about $200 to $300 million a year statewide. So that's not a lot of money to distribute across the entire state, but it's a start to get something new to help. The way these funds will be allocated is interesting. In the first year, 50% of the funding will go to local governments to help update planning documents and zoning ordinances. So our planning department could apply to help fund things such as the permanent supportive housing ordinance, or changes or updates to the community plans, to the general plan, housing element, documents of that nature that will result in streamlining the development of housing. So there's a streamlining of housing component to that requirement, but that's something that might be able to help the planning department in the work that they're doing. The other 50% will be available to programs that assist the homeless, including rapid rehousing, rental assistance, navigation centers, and new construction of permanent or transitional housing. So there's a little bit of money that's available in the first year for that type of activity. After that, in all of the following years, 70% of the money will be allocated to local governments to help for the construction of housing for extremely low, very low, low, and moderate income households. So again, statewide is not a lot of money, but every little bit helps.
Yep.
There's they're using a funding allocation formula from the federal government, and it's not clear whether that is an automatic allocation to local governments, or whether that's how HCD, State Housing Community Development Department, will be distributing the money for projects that come in. So we need some clarity on how that's going to work.
Is a 10-year life on this bill?
Let me check on that and see if it's limited or if it's beyond that. And then the other 30% goes to various HCD programs, including farm worker housing. Of all of those funds in those following years, 20% will be used for owner-occupied workforce housing. Okay. The other funding bill that was passed is SB 3, and that is a bond, a $4 billion bond measure. It will be presented to the voters on the November 6, 2018 election, so that's a year from now in November. That will be allocated to programs that already exist at the state. So they're not going to be creating any new programs. They're going to flow, if the voters approve this, the money will flow into existing programs. 1.5 billion will go into the multifamily housing program, which the city already accesses, and our housing department has worked with projects to help receive that funding. So that's already established. 150 million will go to the transit-oriented development implementation program, and again, the city is involved with that. And an additional $300 million will go to the infill incentive grant program. Again, the city is working with that. There's additional money that goes to the Joe Cerna Jr. Farm Worker Housing Grant Fund, Local Housing Trust Fund Grant Program, Cal Home, and Self-Help Housing Fund. And then, and those are $300 million each. Finally, $1 billion will go to the CalVet Home Loan Program. So that's all great news. It's all new funding. Housing department is tied into some of those. I think it might be helpful if at some point somebody, I don't know if it's the housing department or another department, takes a look at the CalVet program and sees whether there's a way to help vets living in Los Angeles access those funds better. There might be some educational programs. It's not something that the city has a program for as far as I know, but there might be some way that we can help with outreach and such on that. The next set of bills are regulatory in nature. This is SB 35.
Mr. Wickham?
John,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I have a quick question.
Okay.
Does housing still offer the low-to-mod, like the first-time homebuyer program? Do we know? It's still offered?
Ed Gibson with the housing department says it's still offered, yes.
Okay. We don't know if there's any opportunities for allocation. I know CalVet has that outstanding, homebuyer program, but is there any opportunity for us to perhaps see if there's any funding availability to help support the efforts that we need to do for a first-time homebuyer?
Ed Gibson, Housing Community Investment Department. I'm not certain at this moment, but we'll definitely take a look as this stuff moves forward. Yes, we still have our home buyer program. Recently, we came back and we're looking at expanding and working with LA NHS as well to expand. So we will add that too.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Great. So the regulatory programs include SB 35, SB 166, SB 167, AB 879, and AB 1397. The most significant of these is SB 35, which creates a, let me see if I can find a streamlined ministerial process for the approval of housing projects. And what this is saying is that if a city is not meeting the development of housing according to the RENA numbers, then projects can come in under this ministerial process. From a local government standpoint, this isn't great because this is, taking away local control on how we handle our land use and our zoning, and this is not something that your CLA's office would have recommended support for. But this has passed, it's gone to the governor, and so we will be, if the governor signs it, and it's anticipated he will, we will be living with the implications of this bill.
And a city and a local government can avoid this by producing the units that they committed to.
Well, the thing about RENA is that is a number calculated by SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments, as a result of a numerical process. City of Los Angeles really doesn't do construction of housing. We don't have enough funding to go out and build the 10,000 or 10,000, 20,000 units a year. So the League of California Cities, their concern in the way this bill was put forward is it's assuming the cities have the ability to build those units. The city creates the capacity to build those units through its zoning and its land use. We don't have the funding to back that up. We don't have the development procedures in place to actually build them. So there's something of a disconnect between the intent of the bill and what local governments actually have the ability to do. And so from a certain context, there's some difficulty with the city responding. But again, the bill has passed the legislature, is going to the governor. We'll need to develop a program that deals with this. are certain criteria in the bill that allow a project. So first off, if we're not meeting the arena numbers, then this process kicks in. That's evaluated on an annual basis. If we do not report annually to the state on our progress with regard to the housing element, then the streamlined process kicks in. So we might be meeting our arena numbers, but if we fail to report in a timely manner, then we might be obligated to comply with this streamlined processing system.
But if I understand it correctly, this would help Los Angeles in particular with the problem of Los Angeles building and, say, Compton or Montclair or Santa Monica not, or Calabasas not building.
Well, if those cities are well, again, any given city has they're required to have the capacity to build housing, but they're not required to build housing.
Right.
Just as we are. So they're kind of in the same boats. It's more a question of whether those cities are using their land use and zoning authority to deny the development of housing. And some of the other bills in here deal with that kind of activity.
And then just really quickly before you move from that, what does this do about county unincorporated areas?
I'll have to check on that. Yeah. It's
John, real quick on the RENA numbers though, and in terms of what's the mechanism by which they can bypass this? Is it through initiation of someone who's initiating a project that they can kind of bypass that local, because it's now going to be directive from the top down, right, from the state in terms of this new streamlined process?
Yeah, I think there's not a lot of clarity on how. I think it's one of those things where they will, if they meet the criteria, they will ask for it at the desk in the planning department, and they will be able to. Right, I think it's going to be implemented at a local local level, and they'll be able to,
bypass our regulations.
Yeah, particularly conditional use permits or those kinds of things. A project will be able to use this process if it's located. It's basically an urban area program. So you have to be located in an urban area, or the parcel that's being built on has to be adjacent to a parcel that's in a designated urban area. So this bill is targeted specifically at urban areas. Subsidized units, there will be some requirements for subsidized rental units or home ownership units, and there are criteria for that. Projects need to meet objective zoning standards, and there's definitions in the law about what that means. The project will have to pay prevailing wage. The project will not be able to use this streamlined process if it is in certain geographic zones in the city. So if it's in a coastal zone, it's not eligible for this streamlined process. So for example, City of Santa Monica, most of it's in a coastal zone, so it would not be obligated to comply with this. Farmland, wetlands, very high fire hazard zone areas, hazardous waste sites, delineated earthquake fault zone areas, floodplain or floodway areas, and conservation areas are not eligible for this streamlined process. And a very preliminary analysis of the city of Los Angeles shows that 45% of the city is not going to be eligible for this. So it's going to, and it's, the Santa Monica Mountains are not eligible. Coastal zone.
You all analyze the earthquake fault lines?
Yeah, the state has
city, right?
The state geologist actually has a map that delineates what those are. And so the law is very clear on what the sources of those data are.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's some impacts. One of the things for projects that qualify for this is that the city cannot restrict parking requirements in projects that are going under this program. If the project is within half a mile of public transit, if it's in an architecturally significant or historically significant district, when there's on-street parking permits required, or when a car share vehicle is located within a block. So the city can't control those things in a project application if it's under the streamlined process. It does allow for, what's it called? I didn't write the word down correctly here. The design standards, design review.
Design review board.
So there is some design review in here. It's somewhat restricted in maybe what we've done in the past, but there is some design review right still allowed in this bill. What it means really is that the planning department and the city attorney should really take a very close look at this bill to see how they're going to implement it. They will probably have to do some things in ZEMAS to make sure that the database that the city has very clearly designates whether an area is going to, or a parcel is going to be in an eligible area or not, just from the outright. So a developer coming in will know whether they're going to be able to use this process or not. And then we're going to need to make sure that we have the process in place to identify, record, and monitor any units that have affordability restrictions that come through this process. So we're going to have to keep an eye on those kinds of things. So that's really the most complicated and impactful bill, I think, out of all of these regulatory bills. SB 166 relates to some changes in the housing element law, which is something that the planning department implements. On SB 167, this is the Housing Accountability Act, and it requires the local jurisdictions provide written documentation when they deny an approval, or if their actions restrict the amount of housing or reduce the amount of housing that's going into a project or how a shelter is being built. And if the courts find that the city, the local jurisdiction, did not act appropriately in that way, then the courts can assess a fine, a minimum fine of $10,000 per unit. And the city can pay the fine either into a local housing trust fund or into a state trust fund. If it goes into the local housing trust fund, the city has to pay the money or spend the money on an affordable housing project within 5 years. And if we don't, then the money gets swept to the state. And let's see, the source of funds cannot be existing funds that the city uses for affordable housing. It can't be home funds, CDBG funds, or anything like that. It has to be, like general fund or something like that. And then there are, let's see, there's AB 879, which amends, again, certain elements of housing element law and requires HCD to evaluate the reasonableness of local fees charged to new developments. And AB 1397 that amends certain sections of housing element law related to the inventory of land suitable for residential development. So again, these are all things that the planning department needs to take a very close look at. City attorney should look at it as well to determine whether it affects how they do things. Finally, there were two, any questions on the regulatory stuff? So there were two bills related to creating districts, SB 540 and AB 73. SB 540 creates the workforce housing opportunity zones, and AB 73 creates the housing sustainability zones. And basically, this creates a tool where a city can look at a rapid transit area, a transit zone, and create an area, a district around that that designates how housing can be built, do a quick EIR on that, and any project that comes in to be built in that area could use that EIR. So it basically streamlines the whole environmental process and allows a developer to come in and get through the process much more quickly, because all of the zoning, the regulatory issues, the CEQA, have been dealt with in advance. And the workforce housing opportunity zone creates opportunities for, and is focused more on creating workforce housing, whereas the housing sustainability zone is focused more on that. So that's up to 120 or 150% of affordability, whereas the other is up to 80% of median income. So these zones might be helpful in a way. Again, this would require somebody doing, planning department, CLA, CAO, housing department doing some research of where in the city these zones might be created, and providing your offices with some information as to whether you'd like to pursue those kinds of things.
Excellent, thank you. Very thorough report. Any additional questions or comments? Mr. Price? Mr. Rodriguez? Mr. Weezar?
Where do you find the time to do all the other work you're doing? And you are involved in so much stuff for the CLA.
It's been an interesting week. Let
Okay.
me say that.
Thank you. There are no comment cards on this question. So where does that leave us, Mr. Clerk?
The desk is clear, sir.
Excellent. We're adjourned. Thank you all so much.
No kidding. And you gardens. And you garden, right?